Leningrad. It was supposed to go into production in 1990. He had got special permission from Gorbachev to film in the Soviet Union, something that no non-Russian film director had ever got. It was going to be, at the time of production, the most expensive film ever made, starring Robert De Niro, telling the story of the siege of Leningrad, Soviet Union's most costly battle in the whole of World War II in terms of casualties. He was going to be meeting up again with his old mate Ennio Morricone to do the score. It sounded like it had all the ingredients for one of the greatest films ever made. 2 days before signing the contract to start production, he died of a massive heart attack. Total bummer.
Fuck's sake, man. I wish you'd stop eating so much chocolate and like lose some weight or...
Too much pasta.
Yeah, too much pasta.
Mediterranean diet is supposed to be why they all live to like
he was a big
200.
guy though, man. Let's be fair.
He was a fat boy.
Yeah, he was a fat.
Even when you see his little child pictures, when you see him like in the same class as Ennio Morricone, he's not fat yet, but he's got a fat person's head.
I had heard about Leningrad, but I didn't know that extra information you said about it being the biggest budget at the time. What would have been the biggest budget? Do you have a ballpark figure?
So the budget was going to be around about clocking just over $100 million. That wouldn't be actually achieved until Terminator 2 would come out a few years later. You know, it just sounded like it was going to be amazing. It's quite interesting actually, because while he was making Once Upon a Time in America, Leone started learning more about Russia and the Soviet Union, and he actually found out that his films were massively popular in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was trying to ease relationship with America, but also the outside world, and open up the Soviet Union to the rest of the world and not be so isolationist. And that's, you know, in terms of like the economy and stuff, but also culturally. There's so many things that would have been fascinating about this. First of all, Once Upon a Time in America really marked a change in style and for Leone. You know, obviously in terms of the topic, he wasn't making a Western anymore. It was a gangster film, and it was a Western-ish gangster film, and still had some of the motifs of it, and he probably would have kept some of those motifs for the rest of his life and career. Once Upon a Time in America was a lot more grounded and I suppose mature, and then going on to this level of a topic and a more serious topic, huge war, terrible tragedy, awful loss of life, awful living conditions that would have been going on during the siege of Leningrad. And to see that depicted by someone as talented and incredible as Sergio Leone, with Robert De Niro and his absolute pomp. I picked it as my first film in this series because it's the ultimate film I wish could be made. I could have got to see. It just sounds like it would have been so fucking epic. And Leone spent many years formulating it and researching it, and when it came to announce the film, he held a press conference in the Soviet Union journalists to talk about it. Apparently, according to journalists that were there, he spent hours just talking through every single sequence in order. Like, he had the entire vision of the film mapped out in his head of how it would take place and what every moment would be. And they said it sounded incredible, and it's just such a fucking shame, man. You just think like if you put it all together, as much of an impact as Leone's films have had on our lives, is there 10 hours worth of it altogether? And 4 hours of that is one film. That's a lot of film for one film, but altogether it's probably 10-11 hours. It's so little, and just to think like you could have had another big epic, and it might have been a bad film, it might have not worked, but part of me just thinks it probably would have been his best film. Something about where he was at that point of his career, how confident he was in his style, how respected he now was, and all the ingredients around it, the fact that he had this insanely large budget and he was going to get this incredible cast to command with Robert De Niro at the front. I can't imagine the film being anything short of completely spectacular.
Yeah, I guess it would have been sadder actually if he started making it and in the middle he died. Then someone else, I guess, would have had to take it over because the ball was rolling, and even if it was a finished product, it would not feel the same. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I suppose you'd have glimpses of it. And you have the sort of Biggie Tupac syndrome where you always assume when a creative force dies early, you assume they were going to produce so much more. You know, you assume Biggie would have brought out another 10 albums just as good, rather than, you know, doing some auto-tuned horse shit. So maybe it would have been awful, but I don't know. It would have been cool to see a glimpse of it. It would have been cool, because even if it had to get finished by someone else and it ended up being a mess and being shit, you could see glimpses of the genius it might have been.
Yeah, but the appeal with like Biggie and maybe Leone as well is their body of work is all we have and it's all we ever will have. Do you know what I mean? And like, you know, Biggie's 2 albums were like 2 of the greatest rap albums ever. You know, we talked about Tarantino wanting to wind up. If another director picked it up, because I guess the scripts are still like laying about and all the work that was previously done, would you like to see that, or would you like it to be just that's it now, it will never be made?
Do you know what? Nah.
Yeah, I agree.
Leningrad, it's not a famous novel or a great premise. You know, it's a historical moment in time, and that's not the appeal of the movie. That could be the appeal of someone else making a film taking place during the siege of Leningrad, but that's not the thing. The thing is, Leone is the thing. It's the same way with Kubrick's Napoleon. It's not a novel idea to make a Napoleon movie. The reason you're sad that it never got made is because it would have been Kubrick making a Napoleon movie.
Well, Ridley Scott's got one on the way, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I'm sure that'll be interesting, but it has nothing to do with the one Kubrick would have made. But I did think about this before, where I remember I was reading the original script for what Day of the Dead was originally meant to be. George A. Romero's original script was so much more ambitious and more epic and a bigger scale and a bigger cast of characters. He said himself he wanted it to be the Gone with the Wind of zombie films. It was going to be like 3.5 hours long and completely crazy, and the script was incredible. But he took too long to make it. He made a couple of duds, a couple of box office failures. He could never get close to getting the budget he wanted. That version of it was never meant to be. But I love the idea of a director picking up that original script, making it, but not trying to make his version of it, trying to make George A. Romero version of it. Spends all his time watching the original Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and George A. Romero's all his other films, and just films from that era in general. You get actual working cameras from that era and shoot on film, and use the kind of music that would have been used from that period as well, and really try to make as close as possible to what a George A. Romero original Day of the Dead script adaptation would have been like. And I love that idea of people just going back and trying to nearly like mimic famous director style from a particular period and use the same equipment and the same kind of like musical scores from that era and try and create it that way. If someone did that, I'd love it. If Tarantino said, all right, I'm going to cheat and I'll make an 11th film, but it's because it won't be my film and I won't do it in my own style. I'll do it in Sergio Leone style and I'll make Leningrad. Then fuck it. I'd love that. Even still, like I would go in knowing, it's kind of like all that hologram ABBA musician stuff they got now, where it's not, you know, you're really not seeing them. I know it's not really a Leone film, but part of you can enjoy the idea of it being a Leone film and nearly picture it being a Leone film and nearly pretend it's a real Sergio Leone film.
My mind is whirring from it, really, because the other thing that really upsets me about it is the Morricone score. I wonder what he would have done, because it would have been very bleak and dark, and you know, like he would have done something amazing anyhow.
He would have done something you completely wouldn't have expected, and it would have been way better than anything you could have thought of.
And also, I can't think of a war film from the Russian point of view. Obviously, All Quiet on the Western Front was the German point of view, which, you know, I can't think of another one. I'm sure there is, but Enemy at the Gate, was that a Russian sniper?
I mean, yeah, it's
shit, but
I actually didn't mind that film as much as people say it, but I get what you're saying. Like that is from the Russian perspective, but I can't think of many Russian perspective war films actually made by Russia that we've seen.
Yeah, no, I can't. So Again, I would love to see that as well, because, you know, we're from this side of like, we're the good guys kind of thing, like, but people fucking suffered, and like, obviously to educate yourself, you need to learn or know all sides of the story. It's not about your insular view on it, even though we weren't there, of course. I know from reading books, Declan, how bad it was in like that there was no food, it was fucking freezing cold, and when they sent them to basically suicide, you know, like fucking get gunned down, and you know, I'd love to see that in film.
It's like when Clint Eastwood made Flags of Our Father and Battle for Iwo Jima. Really cool concept of making two films from opposite perspectives of the same battle. Really, really cool idea. I'd love to see, really inventive, really interesting. I'd love to see that done more. You know, not just that specific thing, but more interesting ideas like that, and concept movies, or concept two movies together, or even a concept trilogy, kind of in that way. It is so interesting when you think of like different perspectives of wars. Like even just when I was in Asia and I found out in Vietnam they call it the American War, and it's like, of course they do, but it's just funny. It's just funny when you think of it. In Asia, World War II started in 1937, because that's when Japan invaded China. We just have the date. It's like, you know, AD and BC, and we're in the year 2023 just because we're going by our calendar that's set to our religion from the part of the world we're from. But it's all just arbitrary at the end of the day. In Russia, World War II is known as the Great Patriotic War. You know, we just have names for things. They're meaningless, even though it's all the same circumstances we're involved with.
Also, our names just seem like really lazy. It's like they got all these fancy names, which is like First World War, Second World War. They've like made up some mad names for them.
Do you know what? I know what you're saying, but World War One and Two, there's something about that is just, it's so perfectly set.
No, true.
In the name itself, it sets itself above all other wars.
I was thinking the other day, I got quite nostalgic on the subject of wars. Because Andrew, you know my brother Andrew, obviously viewers, I got a little brother called Andrew. So every so often he'll just pop into my room. Assumedly someone's told him at work, or one of his friends have told him. He just popped into my room the other day and was like, have you ever seen Band of Brothers? And I was like, sorry? And I was like, he was like, yeah, someone told me about it. They said it's a really good TV program. I was like, mate, it's literally one of the best TV programs about war ever made. And it just made me really nostalgic. I was like, I might go back and watch it myself.
Yeah. Because I don't think I've actually ever rewatched that since the first time.
I was very, very disappointed about the Pacific.
I was just about to say that.
Whatever it was called.
How shit was that?
The first episode I watched, it was okay. But you know when you kind of watch a first episode and you're like, there's warning signs? I was like watching it and I'm like, oh, I don't know about
Yeah, you kind of delude yourself where you're like, okay, this is getting good now.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh no, it's not, this is shit.
But every single fucking night, even in Band of Brothers where they're not even in the war, where they're going around fucking, you know, training, and like Ross Geller's there, and like, you know, as the training camp sergeant, like, every episode's immense.
It's just fantastic, man. One of the best things ever.